Well, good evening, everybody, for those who are joining us live, and hello if you're watching this on the recording. Welcome to another Calling Conversations. I'm the Reverend Matt Davis, and I'll be hosting us this evening as we discuss and have a conversation about spiritual direction. We'll be asking the question, what is spiritual direction? How do people become spiritual directors? Who can be a spiritual director? And what are the stages you need to go through to become one as well? I'm going to go to my panel now and ask them to introduce themselves and to say what they're currently doing and where they're at.
Shall I kick off?
Please do.
Yeah, so I'm Revd Jane Butler. Apart from other things, I'm the advisor to Bishop Cherry on prayer and spirituality, and I hold the brief in the Diocese of Monmouth for spiritual direction. I'm a spiritual director myself, and I have a spiritual director myself, which is important. And I've been doing that for about 10 years, not as a full-time job. That is the spiritual direction I've been doing for about 10 years, but alongside whatever else it is that I've been doing. So originally, when I was a spiritual director, I was working for the Open University. And since then, I've been ordained, but I was actually a spiritual director before I was ordained. And so then I carried it on alongside my work as a team vicar in the Diocese of Monmouth. And I've just stepped back from doing that actually to be able to do more of this sort of work. So that's what I'm doing at the moment. And I do that work in my own home and in a couple of retreat centres, which I can maybe say a little bit more about later on.
Wonderful.
That's me.
I'm going to be polite and let the ladies go first.
I'll follow on from Jane. My name's Constantina Alexander, and I'm a member of the Third Order of the Society of St. Francis, so a tertiary Franciscan. Currently, I'm the area minister for Wales. And before that, I spent many years as an iconographer. But I've also got a very deep interest in physics and maths. So I'm studying for a second degree in physics and maths, which I spent an inordinate amount of time doing at the moment. It's got very hard. So
well, respect.
I have to have balance in life. So doing some spiritual direction with Jane, I'm a newbie. I've just graduated from the St. Padans school and on the course of spiritual direction. And I must say it's been one of the most wonderful experiences I've had last year, and lots of deep meaning. So hopefully I can share a bit of that tonight, but from a Franciscan perspective, perhaps.
Thank you.
And my name is Ruth Holgate. I am now in the Jesuit Spirituality Centre of St Beuno's in North Wales. I've been working with the Jesuits in the area of spirituality, spiritual direction and retreat giving for the last 27 years. Which feels an awful long time when I say it like that. So we work in the Ignatian tradition, following the spirituality of St. Ignatius Loyola, the peak of which, of course, is the 30-day spiritual exercises retreat, which we've actually got one in the house at the moment, the one about day 4 of 30 days. And again, I might say a bit more about that later. I'm a Catholic laywoman and a Jesuit associate, which means I'm still very much lay, but I've taken promises of obedience for mission to the Jesuits.
And my name is Martyn Evans. I served my curacy in the Monmouth Diocese and then went on to become ministry area leader there. And I'm currently now in the Llandaff Diocese, about to become ministry area of Llangynwyd and Avon, Upper Avon Valleys. So that's due to come. Like Jane, I am a spiritual director, but I also have a spiritual director. But interestingly, as I was exploring my calling and vocation to the church, it was suggested that I should have a spiritual director. Didn't have a clue what they were, what they did, but maybe some of that will become a little clearer during this conversation. So, thank you.
Thank you. So to sort of next question wise, one of the questions obviously and one of the themes of this series is calling. So kind of asking people, what does calling mean to you? And that can be just generally or reflecting on being a spiritual director. Why don't we go in reverse order for that? Martyn, kick us off, please.
Calling, I immediately think of Jesus calling the early disciples, and that following is what initially comes to mind in terms of the words of calling. But I tend to think of it as being a journey as well, and sort of following. So those are the things that immediately come to mind, sort of being called to ministry. No end of conversations in my head, I suppose, and wondering what God was asking me to do, and possibly where God was directing me. What was God's hand in my life? Would probably be a good way for me to sum it up.
Thank you.
Yes,
sorry.
Go on, Martyn.
No, I was going to say, I wish I had some more blinding evidence than that. And, these people that say these things definitely happened at a date or a time and they know exactly where they were. But for me, it's always this little conversation in my head, these little chatters sort of thing, almost conversations with God. Is this what he wants me to do? Is this the direction he's leading me in? So it's nothing mind-blowing, nothing earth-shattering, just the simple gnawing away, possibly. Sorry, Ruth.
No. I mean, I was just going to say, actually, I think it's a bit similar for me. I think if someone had said to me when I first moved into this work, so you're called to be a spiritual director, I probably would have said, not sure about that. It's like I follow the clues, and the clues at that point led me into another Jesuit retreat house where I trained as a spiritual director and started giving retreats. But I think it was 3 years of doing the work full time, working one-to-one with people in spiritual direction, spiritual accompaniment, before I could actually call myself a spiritual director, because that seemed a bit serious. But I was very happy offering people spiritual direction or accompaniment. Somehow that I didn't really identify as a spiritual director for quite a long time. So it's more been in my life, calling has been following what the next clue is, and God seems to know what he's doing. So I've learned to trust that more and more. I had wondered whether I had a calling to be a religious or married or something, but that didn't seem to be the case. God seems to call me sort of one step at a time, and that's worked well for me.
I would say that a lot of that resonates with me, Ruth, because it's like detective work. It's like being a little bit like Sherlock Holmes in the spiritual world, what's around me, what sort of things are coming up. And the first words that came into my head when Matt asked this question was those things in the Bible where the people say, here I am, came into my head. And it's always filled with trepidation when I say here I am, because I think, well, what is he going to ask me to do now that I've said here I am? Because that means I've opened myself up to some adventure. And it is like a journey and an adventure of discovery, and you've got to have sort of courage to follow it. And I wouldn't have said I knew exactly that I wasn't searching to become a spiritual director. It kind of just dropped into my inbox one day, some sort of random email, which was very grateful. And then I just followed it from there. And luckily for me, it was Jane who'd sent me these things. And I decided not to do it at the beginning. And then I came back to her again. But the friendliness and openness and warmth that I received in that conversation kind of made me feel I really want to follow this route and start to get to know these people that I'm getting to meet. So other people sort of help you through, and it is all about relationship with God and with other people as you go through it.
Thank you.
So for me, in terms of a calling to spiritual direction, it actually kind of began really where Ruth's sitting at the moment in the retreat centre of St Beuno's, because I'd gone there for the first time ever to make what's called an individually guided retreat, where you talk to someone every day and they act as a spiritual director for you for the retreat. And then at the end of it, so it's a silent retreat, so you don't know, you don't talk to the other people you're with. And then there was like about 10 minutes at the end when we all kind of got together and who are you, what you do, where you come from. And out of that, I exchanged emails with two people, both really still significant to me today, but one of them put me in touch with someone who became my spiritual director. I'm not that far from where I'm still living. And after I'd been seeing her for a little while, she said, you know, I'm old and I'm past these things now. For example, I don't even know whether the course in spiritual direction in London is still running. And I'm thinking, why is she talking to me about a spiritual direction course? And I went home and I went online and I looked for a London Ignatian spirituality course and I found it and it was still running. And I thought, well, that's in London. I'm in Wales. But anyway, I decided to apply. And so I applied and I went off to London for an interview. And there were two women who interviewed me who were like dressed, you know, like really floaty, sort of green and purple and orange floaty stuff. So as soon as I saw them, I knew that spiritual direction was like not for me, because I'm much more of a sort of jeans and sweatshirt kind of woman. And about halfway through the interview, one of them said to me, oh, you know, when you talk about this, you sound really excited. And I said, do I? That's a mistake. And then one of them said to me, but what about the travel from Wales to London? I said, yeah, I know, it's completely bonkers. It's a really bad idea. But they said, we'd like you to come. And I said, I am only coming for the first year because it's a 3-year course. But the first year had a kind of an opt-out, like you could do it as a year of spiritual formation and then decide whether you wanted to carry on. And it was an opt-out for the course as well. I think that if you were kind of like really terrible, they could ask you to leave as well. So I'm only coming for the first year. And I ended up staying for the 3 years and for a 4th year as an assistant to the course. And as they say, the rest is history. Here I am. But actually, I was a bit of a reluctant recruit because I certainly didn't think, you know, I kind of resonate with Ruth. I definitely didn't think I could, I mean, you know, I could hardly hold on to my own spiritual life, let alone directing anybody else in theirs. And again, I heard Ruth use the word accompaniment, and I like that better because actually there's one director of our spiritual lives, and trust me, it isn't me.
Thank you. So it sort of to follow up that question then, and to lead us on. It would be great to hear about exactly what does spiritual direction as your own personal practice look like, and maybe you want to introduce that as to what you think spiritual direction is, just so we can have some sort of clarity for anyone watching, going like, this sounds exciting, but I'm not sure. You know, give us a phrase for what it is, and then what does that look like in practice for you. So I don't know who wants to kick us off. Does anyone want to take that question first?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I always think back to the road to Emmaus with the 2 disciples, and Jesus walks with them, chatting, listening, and that's what, for me, what spiritual direction can be: just walking alongside somebody, journeying with them, and helping them to see where God is in their life in a particular situation. And I walk the dog quite often, and I often think of that journey of the road to Emmaus. And I'm sure if people came down the lane looking at me and I'm chattering away, I think I've got a very clever Labrador that's going to answer back, or I'm barking mad. But I always think of that journey of just being alongside somebody, not with all the answers, but just to unpack with them where they are, where they think God is in their life, what are the problems, what are the joys they're facing, and sort of connecting with God. So that's my one.
Thank you.
Yeah, I wouldn't say anything very different. I think I sometimes say it to myself as sitting with someone listening for the whispers of God. So I, like Ruth, I trained in an Ignatian background. I'm not as steeped in it as Ruth is, but the 3-year course I did was from an Ignatian perspective. And Ignatius talks about those things that draw us toward God. So I guess I'm kind of listening for those things which are drawing people towards God, and just helping them stay a little bit longer with those things and recognize those things and explore those things. Yeah, something like that. And sometimes, I mean, people are wanting specific things like help with hearing God's voice for a particular decision or way forward in their lives. Sometimes they're there for a week's retreat. Sometimes it's an ongoing relationship. I mean, there's some people who've been coming to see me for a number of years. So in terms of you saying to me, well, what does your work look like? I mean, at its most basic level, it looks like someone coming and sitting down with me and me saying something like, you know, this time is yours. What would it be helpful to talk about? It's very handy if they consciously spend some time with God, because that's the material of what we talk about. So we can talk about absolutely anything. We can talk about their sick cat, or how things are going at work, or their caring responsibilities. But I guess the nub of what we return to is their relationship with God and what that means in the whole of their lives. What would you say, Ruth? You're by far, I think, the most experienced of us, and have done it full time. What do you do when you do that work?
I think you described it beautifully, that idea of listening for the whispers of God. I think that noticing what are the bits of this person's life that can help them notice God better. You know, we kind of work from an assumption that God is at work in each of our lives, but sometimes he's a little bit hidden. And what a lot of people find in the process of spiritual direction, spiritual accompaniment, is as they're talking about their life or their prayer or their relationships, they start to hear themselves talking. And maybe as a director, you just go, oh, or can you say a bit more about that? The classic kind of, you know, get them to talk more about it. So you're kind of homing in on particular areas of their life, and they are discovering for themselves where God is. So on occasion, you might point something out, but more often it's sort of encouraging them to notice themselves that this seems particularly important, or that was particularly significant. One of the things we often find ourselves doing is accompanying people making big decisions, and that they're in that sort of confusing, well, this is a really good idea, and that's a really good idea, and there's all these things that are really good ideas. You know, none of them are a wrong way of spending my life. But how do I choose which is the better one? So between ordination, Catholic Church, between ordination and marriage, or between this person and that person, or between this job and that job. And one of Ignatius of Loyola's great gifts was helping people with that kind of sifting of experience when they're trying to make a big decision, to notice which is the better for this person now. So spiritual accompaniment is very bespoke. It's not that we've got a set of sort of rules or texts that we give to everybody. We listen to the person in front of us, and that experience will be very different to listening to the next one or the next one. And so I think that's the delight about spiritual accompaniment, spiritual direction, is that you get to watch God at work in people's lives. And certainly when I started, I loved the retreat direction. Pretty much what Jane was describing earlier. You meet with someone every day for 6 days or 8 days or 30 days. And I remember thinking after a year or two, I wonder if I'll ever get sort of bored with this. I'm still waiting. And I think there's something about that unique experience that each one brings and hears themselves talking about their relationship with God. So a lot of what you're doing in spiritual accompaniment is validating that relationship as normal, because it's the sort of things that people don't get to say elsewhere. And I think to be able to talk about, this is what's most meaningful to me, or this is where I think I find God. And a director just seeing that as, that's normal, that's great. I think that can be a real gift to a lot of people.
I agree with all of what you've all said. It's very profound. I'm a newbie, so I'm kind of really green as the spiritual direction goes. But I think one of the things that strikes me most about what I've gained from the small experience I've had so far is the relationship between not only the person you're directing and God, but you with them and you with God. And so far, in the ones that I have accompanied so far, is the feeling of being part of a three, that it's not just me and the directee there. You feel that presence of God, of Christ. really powerfully, and that is really moving. And sometimes if you allude to it in the conversation, it really helps deepen it, because you bring that closeness of that relationship of the three souls together almost, in a way. And I find that incredibly beautiful. And I think the most important thing about it is getting out of the way, so that the person who's coming to you can feel able to unfold, unwrap, unpack, let go of, and explore. And really, you're there to listen in a loving way. But also, I think Ruth mentioned that sometimes you can challenge, or you can make some comment that can actually help the process, or something you notice which might be of help. So it's not just passive listening, there is that intensive listening, and just noticing that one thing or a couple of things that might be a little sort of task to do for the next time. And I found that actually is quite powerful, and that people have come back and said, well, you remember you mentioned so and so. Well, I really tried to work on that, and then we've had a discussion about it, and it's been really quite interesting. And from a Franciscan perspective, that there's this side of humility that actually, being a spiritual director is a bit highfalutin a term for me, but you learn, you get direction for yourself in the process. So I think it's not one-way process, it's really very mutual, and I think there's a mutual growth for everybody in that situation. It is incredibly moving. I think it's a beautiful thing.
It's a massive privilege, actually, that people will share of themselves to you. It is a really holy place to stand.
I find it interesting. Ruth mentioned some of those major life choices. Then there's a danger that you might think that spiritual direction are life coaches. They can fix these problems, they can answer these problems. And I love the fact that Constantina said she keeps out of the way. So we have these big decisions that are going on, and they're not all necessarily all big decisions, but as you mentioned, Ruth, lots of big decisions. And then, so how do we get to the answer? How do we move things forward when Constantina rightly says we try to keep out of the way? And I think the bit that really struck me when you were talking about that, the both of you, was there's a third person in the room, isn't it? And it's God, and it's, you know, his direction, his guidance, us asking, maybe sort of prompting with some questions, but at the end of the day, they come up with the answers, don't they? With God's help, guidance, Holy Spirit, it's them that comes up with the answers to those big decisions, and then seeing where God is in it. You know, I just loved the contrast of the big decisions, but we keep out of the way. So how does it happen?
But Ruth as well said earlier that Ignatius has some good helps for how we might help people, not us making decisions for them, but just sort of saying to them, well, you know, Ignatius has these suggestions, and one of those that I really love is, like, you know, if you were on your deathbed and you were thinking about this decision, like, which way would you have wanted to have taken it? So, you know, if you're thinking about whatever, taking a new job, and you're there on your deathbed and you thought, well, yeah, I just didn't quite have the courage to do that, or would you regret it? Or would you sort of go, phew, you know, that was such a good decision not to have taken that? So there are some ways, a bit, you know, Constantina was saying, you get out of the way, but there are some ways, there are some things that you can offer sometimes, of just ways of people thinking about things. I don't know whether it's true, Ruth, but I've heard it said that, like, you know, good Jesuit kind of like has a skull on their desk to remind them of that death perspective.
None of the Jesuits I know, but yes, I think not that I've seen.
A Christmas present possibility.
It's a thought. Yeah. I think one of the things that we would, and this is a big theme of Ignatius, that we'd encourage, is a certain spiritual freedom. That most of us going into decisions have got motivations that are really about who we are at a deep level, you know, who we are before God at a deep level. And there are other things that are fairly superficial sort of attachments, Ignatius calls them. So I remember when I was making the decision whether or not to apply for this job in Liverpool to work with the Jesuits, I was actually making a 30-day retreat in this place at the time, trying to decide, do I get a proper job or do I stay in ministry, which as a Catholic woman is not always a great career move. But, you know, that was the kind of choice in front of me. And at the time I was doing loads of windsurfing. There isn't much good windsurfing around Liverpool, has to be said. And I kept coming back to this, oh, but I love windsurfing. I'd been working in a parish and I'd really had a sense of windsurfing was very good for me. It helped me with my parish work. So Ignatius would call that an inordinate attachment, you know, and I was kind of caught with this. So it was getting in the way of the actual decision. And I had a very wise spiritual director who didn't say that's an attachment. He just said, okay, so what's that like? You know, to just sort of put this, if you like, put the windsurfing at the center of your life as you're trying to make a decision about ministry. It's like, oh, yeah, that's what I'm doing. And it was very much easier then to, okay, well, I love doing that, but I'll put it to one side. So it's that kind of intervention a director can make, not telling you, but just noticing, oh, I'm noticing you're saying a lot about, and I'm noticing you're doing that. And it kind of brings you to a sense, oh, yes, that's okay. Yeah, no, I can let go of that a little bit now. So I think there's something about those techniques, and particularly around freedom, and no one is ever completely free, but we can pray for the grace to be freer. And a director, I think, can really help with that, by that just kind of noticing what they're hearing and what they're seeing.
Me, fear was one of those. You know, I just noticed that things I was afraid of could easily stop me going in a particular direction, and just being helped to notice that fear was there, but I didn't actually have to make the decision based on that fear. I could set that fear to one side and not let it have an undue pull on me. It was really, really helpful.
So I think things resonate, don't they? If you have that truth in you from listening and then making that observation, and it will resonate with the other person, and they will see that for themselves, isn't it?
Sorry, Ruth.
I was just going to say, and the great thing about what we're always saying on the training courses for spiritual directors is be tentative. So you might have this amazing intuition as a spiritual director, and you kind of put it out there and it just goes straight over the person's head. and it's like, great, so let it go over the head, because it's obviously not relevant to them at the moment, you know. So we put things out there tentatively. We're not sort of gurus who say, aha, this is my spiritual wisdom for you. It's much more, oh, I'm noticing that. And if they go, nah, it's not about that, then you let that go, because it's like, well, either it might be about that, but they're not in a place to see it at the moment, in which case, why would you bring it up? Or actually, you just got it wrong because your intuition was completely unfounded. So it's kind of that tentativeness goes with the boldness of making a comment or saying, I'm noticing this, and taking that risk, but in a gentle way, so they can take it or leave it. It's really in their hands with God rather than you. And I think the danger of spiritual directors being seen as great spiritual gurus, and that's not our tradition. We don't sort of operate in that way, I don't think.
Yeah, I did actually once have a spiritual director who, on a short retreat, who told me I was depressed. I said, I'm not depressed. And he said, I'm not saying clinically depressed, but you are depressed. I said, I'm not depressed in any way, shape or form. And I wasn't either. And I know what they were seeing. Actually, they were seeing penitence, and they mistook it for depression. Yeah, actually, interestingly, because when you're saying something that's heartfelt, you tend to drop your voice, and I wasn't very proud of myself, and that was mistaken for depression. So I'd echo that, Ruth. And if somebody tells you that you've got it wrong, then you've probably got it wrong.
Yes, in the same vein, quite early on, I had a spiritual director who was very different from me. I'm kind of the jeans and sweatshirts brigade as well, Jane. And she said, oh, I see you today, Ruth. You've come in dressed just in blue. What's that saying about, how you are today? And I was saying that was the only thing that was clean. Because I'm not someone who really pays much attention to, how I dress. She would not let it go And I'm afraid it was the end of our spiritual direction relationship, because it really isn't relevant to me, but it was very relevant for her. And I think, again, this is what Constantine was saying about getting out of the way. We have to work at that sometimes. If we get hooked into, this seems important, and that letting go and say, we are not important in this.
The other thing which is really odd, though, is I can, like, when I'm being accompanied, when I'm seeing my own spiritual director, and I think it's true for people I see as well, I don't know, you'd have to ask them, is that sometimes you hear yourself saying something and then you kind of go, oh, is that right? And there's a very strange power in saying something out loud to another person. And it's kind of a way of, it helps me to work out what I think for myself as well, actually. So I might go away and just kind of reflect on that a little bit and say, well, I'm surprised to hear myself say that. Is that really what I think about something? And sometimes it will be. And sometimes I think, well, I said that, but it's not quite like that. It's more like this. And that process can be incredibly helpful. And it sounds weird that it should work, but somehow it does.
So we've talked a bit about the, I suppose, sort of like the process of spiritual direction, and kind of like where, the sort of the ideal, I suppose, the ideal we want in terms of having a spiritual director and being a spiritual director, and talking about that. I wonder, is there some things which you'd be looking for in someone to be a spiritual director? Is it all shapes and sizes, or is there some things where good qualities to have?
I think a number of the attributes have been already touched on tonight, which was keeping out of the way, not making those diagnoses. Jane, as you said, you're depressed. It's not putting words into people's mouths, etc. It's listening attentively. And I love this idea of just keeping out of the way, but observation, what else is going on, body language, maybe saying, oh, I noticed you said something. And as Ruth rightly said, if it doesn't resonate with them, drop it. And I think it's those skills of being able to let go of things, and also just sit with somebody and just think, okay, what am I hearing here, and offer it back. But not in a way that you're suddenly prescribing or.
Yeah, there are lots of training courses around. So if you're thinking of embarking on spiritual direction, I suppose the first thing I'd say is, if you've got a spiritual director, because it's always pretty handy to know what it is from that side, if you like, that you're thinking of offering. In terms of is there one particular size? I don't know. I'm hesitating because, Ruth, I was going to say it's something that people generally come to, as it were, in the second half of life. But I think you do quite a lot of work with younger people as well, don't you? So I'll be interested to hear how that pans out. But apart from that, I'd say go into a spiritual direction course openly and expect to be changed and formed yourself. And as you go along in the training, for most people, assuming most people are a bit reflective in the process, then you'll come to feel whether it's something to which you're called and at which you're skilled, or whether it's been lovely to do this course. Thanks very much. I've learned a lot, but I'm not sure that this is for me for now. I think that's the way that I would go, and chat to somebody. But the other bit of it is it one size? One of the joys is that you can be a man or a woman, you can have a dog collar or not have a dog collar, and it tends to be ecumenical as well. I know there are lots of people who go to Ruth Centre, which is run by the Roman Catholic Jesuits, who are come from all different denominations. I see people who are Catholics, Methodists, Evangelicals, Anglicans, even people who are ordained, people who are not ordained, people who have been involved in different forms of church leadership or none. And one of the great joys to me is seems to be one of those areas where boundaries fall away, actually, because it's about people's relationship with God and with God in their lives. And for anyone who's kind of, to pick up Martyn's language, walking the Emmaus way, walking alongside Jesus, the rest doesn't matter in terms of categories. It matters much more in terms of kind of disposition and desire and joy and interest and all of those things. Yeah. Ruth, what about the younger people and anything else you wanted to say?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we would often say is, spiritual direction and this sort of accompaniment is a charism. It's a gift. It's a gift that can be developed and can be polished, and you can add some really good basic active listening skills. You can train people how to do these things in a slightly more skillful way. But at root, it is a gift. It's a charism. It's a calling, rather than just being trained to do it. And I think that so to do spiritual direction formally, where you are someone's spiritual director or some people's spiritual director, it's kind of one end of the scale. But at the other end of the scale is something we refer to as spiritual conversation. This was a great tool of St. Ignatius, who just fell into conversation with people, found out what interested them, and one way or another got the conversation around to God. Now, we probably wouldn't be quite that explicit these days, but what we would say is the world needs people who listen, whether you're at a bus stop, at the school gate, whether it's your colleagues at work. So anyone who can learn to listen well, and then at another level to listen in a discerning way. So be able to say, and I know God is at work in this person's life. Is there any way that I can help them to notice that? So those sort of conversations are ones that we really need to be very widespread, I think, in the world. And so a lot of spiritual accompaniment training can really help people to deepen those skills of listening. Whether or not they have a charism for formal spiritual direction, they can learn to listen better, both to themselves, to God, and to each other. So we would do here an introduction to spiritual accompaniment, which we're going to start calling spiritual conversation course soon, I think, which is just that. It's basic listening skills, basic discernment, building of rapport and relationship, with the thought that when you engage in conversation informally, it can have a depth, it can have a possibility of a moment of God in that one-off conversation. For people then who are particularly gifted at that, or seem to those who are training to have a sense of this, and themselves seem to want to go further tentatively, they might carry on to make to do a full spiritual direction training course. But it's a minority who would then go on to do spiritual direction. So I think I suppose we're quite keen not to make spiritual direction a thing to aspire to, but rather, well, if that's where you're called, you'll get there, and you might need to push a few doors and go along the way. But actually, if we can all learn to listen better, then our churches would be much better places, and I think the world would be a better place. So I suppose at root, it's a charism, it is a calling. Tentativeness tends to be a marker. I tend to be keener on training the people who say, well, people just keep coming and talking to me, I think I better do some training, rather than those who tell me they are called to spiritual direction, but no one's ever actually talked to them about their spiritual life. So you kind of, and it's something of a tentativeness, I think, is healthy, moving into this kind of training, if you like.
It's interesting you said that about the listening, and not necessarily for spiritual direction, but part of my calling into ministry. I look back, as I was an accountant previously, was the number of people that would come and talk to me and share their personal stories. And I was at a senior position in the company. There was no reason for them to share these different things, but yet my door seemed to be open, and they told me some of the most detailed things about their personal relationships, about their children, etc. And part of my discernment process is, why are you talking to me, sort of thing. And it's back to that sort of, it's somebody they feel they can go and talk to and trust, and just be listened to, really. And it's strange. I've spoke to a couple of people since I left that company, and some of them have said to me, do you know, I'm looking back now, I'm not surprised you went into ministry. You were always a good listener. So it's I think your comments there were really interesting. It's spending time listening, isn't it? And not judgmental.
Yeah.
Just being there for people.
Yeah, and just talking about spiritual conversations as well, because it's actually a bit of a sadness to me that they can be few and far between in our churches.
Mm.
Yeah, and yeah, that it seems sad to me that that's the whole reason, the centre of our gathering together, and yet we so seldom seem able to have those conversations.
From a Franciscan perspective, what interests me most is from part of my voluntary work that I do each week. It centres around complete and utter listening, non-judgmental listening, support, and being there for people. How, like you said already, so few people really get the privilege of being listened to properly, really and sincerely being listened to. There's a cause of so much pain in the world, and for me, even just going through that training for that, and then this training for spiritual direction, it's reinforced it. And really, from my point of view, Franciscans like to be on the fringes and on the edges of society where things are sometimes breaking down quite a bit, and just being there with people and holding that moment with them. And how I would just love to see more of this happening with people, just stopping for a moment just to take time anywhere in the world, whether it's in church or anywhere, no matter whether people are in a religion or not in a religion, just to have that humanness with each other. So more, I think, Matt, you said someone asked a question about how can you do this in schools with young people or whatever, but I think there is a need, I feel, somewhere along the line to sort of inculcate this absolute listening in people. That we're too driven, I think, in a lot of ways to achieve and do things and be something, and we forget the most wonderful thing at the root, which is being a human being walking alongside another human being and experiencing all those rich things that the spiritual life also gives us. Years ago, a friend of mine from Indonesia, is a Muslim actually, said that when they were growing up, after they'd finished work at the end of the week, they'd just go out into the jungle and find someone to talk to about spiritual things. That's what we all did at the weekend. It's part of life. I think we've distanced ourselves. We put things in little boxes and categories and separate them out. I'd really love to see more things diffusing out amongst, in all sorts of ways, where we can spread this kind of deep, sincere listening with people.
I think one of the things we talk about in training is the sort of different levels of listening, that a lot of the listening that happens day to day is just listening to respond. So it's the tennis match. I'll just listen to you long enough until it's my turn, and then I'll get my bit in. And it's got very little to do with what you've just said. It's just sort of, somehow it's a very lightweight connection. And then listening to understand is, I'm really listening to you, but it's still at this level. And the listening we're talking about is the listening for meaning, and being genuinely interested in the person. So you're not just doing a number on them to convert them or to get your point across or to sell them something, which is, I think, the misuse of these things, but you're genuinely interested in what's going on for this person. And when you are genuinely interested, whether it's in a spiritual conversation, normal conversation, or spiritual direction, that people pick that up. They know in that moment that you are genuinely concerned for them, loving them in Christian terms, there to really hear them. And I think the more we can promote that, the better. That'll result in a few more spiritual directors. But, if we could just have a couple of thousand spiritual conversationalists for every spiritual director, I think that would be great.
Matt, you mentioned as well, was it sort of one size fits all? And I've had several spiritual directors on my journey so far. And I also think it's the ability not to ask the awkward question as well, or the difficult question. And sometimes not to let go, because I can remember as an ordinand wrestling with something and going to see my spiritual director, and I came away exhausted. I felt mentally drained. But when I look back, he was absolutely right, because he was trying to unpack something with me, and helped me to see. And it was all the open-ended questions with me doing all the work. He never came up with any of the answers. He never told me anything. But I remember walking away thinking, my gosh, I've had a real beating today. but it wasn't. I look back and it was that ability to spot in me. I was wrestling with something. How did he help me sort of come to terms with that?
And it sounds like he had a really good rapport with you, so you trusted the process that you were in. So it wasn't being beaten up by someone who knew better, but someone you trusted who was really there for you, and therefore you prepared to do the work of engaging.
It was the drilling down, it was the digging down all the time. And I'd wrestled with my first placement where I went, where there was loads of services taking place, several on a Sunday morning, the evening, lots of occasional offices, baptisms, funerals, all the rest of it. And then I found myself on a second placement where there was just the service on a Sunday morning, and I was thinking, oh, is this what ministry's about? But then suddenly found out how this other person then, where the service is required, did so much in the community, so much good work, with food parcels on a real deprived estate and all the rest of it. And you really saw somebody living out their faith. And I look back again, and that was a huge, and I think I learned more there in the end than in the busyness of my first placement, which I thought was wonderful at the time. But it was just that, well, what did I think ministry was going to be about? Was it going to be all front of house then, for want of a better expression, taking the services, instead of all the other work that went on, and that actual, living out your faith. And this particular person was known by his Christian name to so many different people from different organizations. Why? Because he would have spent time with them, listening to them, serving them. So, I found that fascinating.
Yeah, it's often something kind of unexpected sometimes. You think things are going to go one way, or you envisage something in a particular way. And then you find that actually, when you look back, it's actually something completely different. And unexpected that you're led to, or whatever. We can never know. I study this in physics. There's always something on another dimension or in another geometry that's completely different from what we have been brought up to believe. So there's levels and levels and levels of things, and it's very exciting. And I think spiritual direction is a way of seeing anew something that you're used to and familiar with, but seeing it from another perspective, from another viewpoint, perhaps stepping back from yourself and seeing it from a God perspective, maybe, or not from a God perspective, but a little bit further back. And it gives new meaning to what you might not have seen before. And I think that's one of the beauties of that relationship you have with your spiritual director. You can get an alternative perspective to look again, and see wider. And
not necessarily the initial sort of topic you thought you were going to discuss. Jane mentioned it earlier. You sit down, you start the process. What would you like to sort of discuss today, etc. And you suddenly find a couple of minutes into it that your spiritual director realizes that wasn't the case. That's not really the theme, and you get the option to say, well, actually, but I'm hearing something else. What do you want to talk about in this particular on this particular occasion? And quite often those opening couple of minutes will be nothing to do with what they really want to talk about, is it? But it's also allowing them people to talk and have that ability to spot the difference, isn't it? And suddenly think, gosh, you started on X, but you really are talking an awful lot about Y. Shall we have a chat about Y?
Yes.
And I think that happens a lot when people do retreats, whether it's retreats in daily life, meeting people, or coming on retreat. And a number of times people have come for sort of a week-long retreat, and they say, right, I've really got to make this decision. And, by the end of this retreat, I really need to know what I'm doing. And I would always tend to say, okay, well, just shelve that for a day or two, and we'll just spend a bit of time with the Lord, just talking to God. Let's see where you are with God. Let's talk about prayer a bit. And then day 6 or 7, I'm beginning to get nervous because they've not brought the decision back in. And I said, well, so you came in with this, yes, they said, oh, no, I decided that a couple of days ago, but this has become more important. So you gain a different perspective by, whether it's on retreat or in spiritual direction, just kind of stepping back. And I think I would say this, I run a retreat centre, but, I think retreats are a great way into spiritual direction, whether it's a week of guided prayer in a parish or coming away for a weekend to a place like St. Beuno's or some of the other retreat houses. And you get a little taster of spiritual direction. You meet a director each day for a couple of days, 4 days, 5 days. And I think that's how you would get a sense of, what this can do in your life. And, people don't always need spiritual directors, but there are occasions in life when it's useful to have one. So to know what it is, I think is quite helpful.
I think that's where maybe looking back, possibly that's where my interest might have grown from, having sort of been recommended to have a spiritual director, like lots of people exploring vocations and potentially going to become an ordinands, advised to have, but not necessarily having a clue what they're about, or and then going on a number of 5-day silent retreats myself and meeting with the prayer guide on a daily basis, and then finding out over the years how valuable I found that.
Mm.
I think that's what's drawn me more and more to think, gosh, if I find it valuable, you think about what I can do for other people as well. If when you set your time and you look into this and realize what it can do for you as well, how it can help you.
So just because we're going to be coming into land soon, just want to mention to people, if you do have any questions for any of our panellists that you'd like to ask, then please do type them into the chat, and we'll ask them live and see what they say. But I wonder, I've got 3 more questions for us. I wonder if we could get through. I'll have a think about. The first question is if anyone has been watching this or has come to this video, if they're watching it later, or come to this live stream thinking, I want to be a spiritual director, or I'm thinking about it, or this has piqued my interest, what would you suggest to be their next steps? In terms, we've already touched on that a bit, about going on retreats and maybe finding a spiritual director as well, and just starting that conversation. But what's the sort of next steps? The second question, we can tag on to the end of that, is should people have a spiritual director? Who's it open for? What's the sort of, again, we've touched on that a bit, but just to clarify for us again, who's a spiritual director for? The first question just being that, what's next steps, thinking about it, and then who's a spiritual director for? I will leave it up to you to decide who wants to be eager to answer that question.
Well, we just happen to have a course here in St. Beuno's next month on Introduction to Spiritual Accompaniment. Look at our website. But yeah, I think if getting your own experience of receiving spiritual direction, I think what Martyn said, that's the first thing to do. And then a spiritual director should be able to point you towards next steps if together you discern, actually, this does seem to be something I want to explore. So getting spiritual direction yourself, and I presume there are lists in the diocese, or yes, Jane. So that's probably the first step, and then your director can help you on that journey, so you don't have to do it sort of on your own.
Yeah, if you're listening from and you live or worship within Monmouth Diocese, then I do hold a list of spiritual directors. That's not the only way of getting a spiritual director. Another really common way is through word of mouth, or sometimes people approach, if they've had a retreat, they might have a chat with someone at the retreat centre and say, can you help me find a spiritual director? Although they'll probably point you to somebody more locally. So I hold a list of spiritual directors, and the people on the actual diocesan list, you can have some assurance are people who have had some training and who have certain safeguards in place. So, for example, they go and see somebody as a supervisor to talk about their own practice as spiritual directors. So they're not, as it were, just floating free, and they do some continuing kind of development as well. So they're reflective about what they're doing, which is always a good thing. But having said that, as Ruth said earlier, it's a charism, it's a gift. And sometimes you talk to other people, if you know people who have spiritual directors, because probably, certainly several of the people that I see actually just came through word of mouth. So that's another way of trying to find somebody. Don't be afraid to go and see a couple of people, get a feel for whether you feel comfortable with them, whether you're going to be able to share what you need to with them. Because at the end of the day, it's quite a personal thing. And, you know, somebody that might work for me as a spiritual director might not work for Matt, and vice versa. So don't be afraid to go and see someone a few times, have a little review together to see whether it's working. There's no problem for any good spiritual director. There's no problem if you say, yeah, I don't think this is working for me. They'll feel that as well. So yeah, I think I'm going to see if I can go elsewhere or take a break for a while. It's not a problem. Try it and see. Find somebody you feel comfortable with would be my advice.
Yeah, there's got to be an open and honesty, isn't there, right from the start, and whether or not you see that connection with somebody, and as you rightly say, we'd start by saying, well, listen, let's just pray about this and think about it as well. You know, is this a good match, isn't it, for both, really? I think that's quite important. My default would have been back to Jane anyway, because I've known her for a few years now, and I'd go, somebody's interested in X or Y, and what are your thoughts? So
yeah. And in terms of who it's for, potentially it is for anyone. You certainly don't have to be either religious in terms of, like, you know, a monk or a nun, religious with a capital R. You don't need to be like hugely holy and pious. When I started off as receiving spiritual direction, I was going to say all over the place spiritually, like I'm sorted now, but which I'm not. But I was completely all over the place, and it was just really helpful to have someone to talk to. So don't feel kind of like my faith is too flaky, or I don't really know what I think about things, because actually spiritual direction can be just the perfect place to find someone you trust to just work some of that out within yourself. Someone who won't push you or tell you what to think or try and teach you. There's a place for teaching faith, but it's not always within spiritual. It's not often within spiritual direction. And sometimes as well, for people who are kind of looking for a deeper life of prayer and don't know quite how to go about it, again, spiritual direction can be a great place to explore that. So don't be afraid. If you're within Monmouth Diocese, get in touch. You'll find my email address on the Monmouth Diocese website, and we can have a conversation.
And I think I'd add to that, and don't be afraid if you're younger than most of the spiritual directors you see around you. I think I've just spent the last 3 years doing young adult ministries in London, and I think lots of people in their 20s really get a lot from spiritual direction. So if you're on the younger end and you're thinking, what am I doing with my life? What do I want to do? When's my life going to start? And you want to talk about these things in a Christian context, then spiritual direction can be a great place to do that.
Yeah, I wish I'd had that when I was in my 20s. It would have been so helpful.
I think it's also helpful to say what it's not as well. I mean, it's not counselling, and it's not advice giving or anything like that. And I think a good spiritual director will make it very clear what the situation is, and also about confidentiality as well, because that's very important. And as Jane mentioned, we have supervisors we'll go to. When we talk about our practice, we're very, very careful not to identify anybody at all. It's a very general thing, and we're usually talking about our feelings about how we've managed. So I think that's very important for people to realise that they can trust the process, and it's legit, basically.
Thank you. That's wonderful. So we had one question which came in advance, which we sort of touched on, which was for us to answer, which was how can we help develop spirituality in children? And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, because it kind of touches on this sort of spiritual spiritual accompaniment, and also because children's spirituality is obviously very important and something to be fostered, and also incredibly meaningful as well. So I wonder if someone would like to take that for us.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Not that I've got a huge depth of experience in working with young children, but there's a very lovely scheme called Godly Play, which takes stories from the Bible and it tells them in a very visual way for children. It's quite gentle but quite powerful, and it asks lots of open questions. They usually start "I wonder." So if you were talking about, I don't know, the parable of the prodigal son, you might ask, I wonder whether those sons had names. I wonder how they got on when they were little children. I wonder whether they had any sisters. I wonder what their mum thought. I wonder what it was like feeding those pigs, whatever it might be. And you can then encourage children to just start those wide spiritual wonderings themselves. I wonder why the father welcomed that youngest son home again, when he'd been so naughty. And it's not a way of teaching which tells children what to think. It's a way of teaching, a way of opening up the spiritual world, which enables children to think. And it's very strong in the way it uses, for example, it uses things that help children understand what's going on in church. So, for example, when God comes close to Abraham in the desert, the storyteller who's leading the session will bring their hands down on a wooden figure which represents Abraham, and as a symbol of God coming close to Abraham. So when a young child is then in church and sees the priest asking the Holy Spirit to come on the elements, that child will have an instinctual understanding and feel that closeness of God, because that's what they've seen enacted through godly play, and they're allowed to touch afterwards. There's some time for them to explore and touch the objects themselves, or work with materials themselves, or express themselves creatively, and some prayer time as well. And for me, that's a lovely way of developing a child's spirituality in a very open and sort of non-didactic way. And you can then listen to them, and as we might do in spiritual direction, not get out of the way, don't put yourself in there, but reflect what the children are exploring back to them so that they can explore it more fully. I don't know if anyone else would like to add anything.
That sounds like something that, sorry, Martyn. It just sounds like something that I would just love to see adults doing as well, to rediscover that child within them, because as an artist, I often would do things like that with people, to play rather than to take it seriously and have to get things right, to just get the hands in the paints and just play with it and discover. And the freedom that sometimes that brings. And when you were talking about the wondering why this, I was thinking, I just love to do that.
Well, when I did the training for it, I felt like, I genuinely felt like I'd been on retreat myself. And I genuinely had that spiritual exploration and formation myself. So I completely echo that, Constantina.
I wish I knew that that question was coming, because I'm trying to think where I saw it recently. It might have been the Church Times, where certain primary schools, I think, are piloting having a sort of quiet moment after lunch, and there were 5 themes that they were looking at. For the life of me, I can't remember them. I wish I'd paid more attention now. But I think it got them to reflect on the sort of morning that they'd had, what happened during lunchtime, what was about to happen in the afternoon. And like all things, we can then say, okay, where was God's hand in this? Or if somebody's behavior wasn't good, again, just saying, is that the sort of thing that, Jesus would have wanted us to do? And how do you think he treated people? There's a danger, obviously, with schools. We've got to be careful that we're not sort of preaching too much. But I found that interesting, how some of the schools are piloting that. And sometimes with some of the sort of well-being stuff, we could quite easily link it back to sort of a meditation, couldn't we, from our perspective? But I thought that was quite interesting, how they were reflecting on what had happened, good behavior, bad behavior, nice things.
Yeah, I would say just two things to add. If you're looking to run for smaller children, early primary school, there's a resource called Did You Disciples, which uses a lot of stuff like that and is very reflective, which I personally enjoy using. Works with babies up till about 5-6 years old. I think possibly a bit older as well. And also, we've talked about a lot about the Ignatian spiritual practices. If you're willing to give a go, you can simplify those down as well. Especially stuff like the examen and things like that, which can be quite useful and make them into more accessible language for children. I don't know what Ruth thinks about that, but you can do all sorts of things in terms of looking at that stuff as well, which is play, like we said, because God listens. So we're going to wrap things up quickly because we've gone a little bit over time. So thank you for your contributions and that, and thank you for everyone who's watched online. But just for a final sentence from us here, what's one last bit of wisdom you would give to someone thinking of becoming a spiritual director?
Get yourself a spiritual director. That's mine. If you haven't got one already, get one. If you have got one, talk to them about it.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I agree with Jane. I think I once heard our previous Archbishop say, if you don't put your foot in the water, you can't get across to the other side. So yeah, get yourself a spiritual director and or start to ask some questions about what it's like and what does it involve.
I'd absolutely echo that completely. And maybe as a second step, just start engaging in conversation with people and listen to them and see what happens.
Yes, that was something I was going to say, is stop now, wherever you are, whatever you're doing in each day, find a moment where you can actively listen to someone, a stranger, someone on the bus, really listen and see what it feels like to actively really listen to another person and see how that affects you.
And listen to yourself as well.
So that was spiritual direction. Thank you very much for joining us, and I've
lovely
enjoyed. Yeah, I've really enjoyed the conversation this evening. And if you do have any follow-up questions or you do want to get in contact, I think we can probably make sure that you can find a way to, especially for Monmouth Diocese, Jane's details easier than searching through the website as well.
Thank you.
So thank you very much, everyone. I hope you all have a good evening, and thank you again to our panellists. See you soon.
Thanks ever so much.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
We do a wave, is it?